Hello and welcome to Coffee and Conversations with eTrepid, the Next Generation Firewall. My name is Jim Garvin. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer here at eTrepid, and I'm here to meet your needs and help guide you on your journey to compliance. Also joining me today is Shamsul Khalid, also known as Sam. Sam is our Director of Service Operations here at eTrepid, and he'll also be able to help answer questions at the end of the webinar. I'd also like to take a moment to introduce you to Tom Blanford. Tom is the CEO of eTrepid, and he's the mastermind behind the company. Tom has a unique career path that resulted in the establishment of the company in the image of his service. As a U.S. Navy veteran, Tom's military service and information technology background led him to create and become a premier, award-winning global IT service provider. For those of you who are not familiar with eTrepid, our team focuses on cybersecurity, cloud computing, AI and machine learning, as well as unified communication services such as voice over IP. eTrepid services are highly customizable and can be specifically developed to meet any business needs or compliance concerns. Our headquarters is located in Mechanicsville, Maryland, and just last year we opened an office in Noida, India, staffed with all eTrepid employees. Today's Coffee and Conversation with eTrepid brings you guest speaker Brian Haken, Fortinet's Channel Account Manager. Brian's going to speak today about the key features of the Next Generation Firewall. So if you've not done so, grab your favorite coffee cup, pour a cup of coffee, and listen in to gain information that will help you combat new strategies cyber scammers are using to get your information. We're going to hold the questions until after the presentation, giving Brian an opportunity to provide all the information that he has for us today. But please feel free to use the Q&A feature provided at the bottom of your screen and ask questions along the way or comments in the chat section. We have a team monitoring these sections and will provide answers to your questions when we get to that portion of the conversation. Also, everyone who's here today and remains on until the end of today's presentation will get a $10 Starbucks gift card. We do have your information from the event registration, and we will be reaching out to ensure everybody receives their card. So for now, we're happy to host your midday pick-me-up, so let's get started. Brian Haken, he is the Channel Account Manager for Fortinet, helping to secure the largest enterprise service providers and government organizations around the world. He's been with Fortinet for just under 6 years, and he lives with his wife in Reno, Nevada, along with their cat and dog. Accompanying Brian during the presentation today will also be Nathan Darr. Fortinet empowers its customers with intelligent, seamless protection across the expanding attack surface and the power to take up on ever-increasing performance requirements on borderless networks today. So with that, let's get started as Brian guides us through the Next Generation Firewall and what it entails. Brian, the floor is all yours. There you go.
Yes, it does.
Right. Welcome and thank you today.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Much appreciated. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here and we will dig into it. All right, can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, so today we're gonna go over some of the basics of the FortiGate interface, which is Fortinet's main firewall appliance. Along with that, point out some of the key differentiators that Fortinet has in its main firewall FortiGate that you might not find with some of our competitors. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And in doing so, kind of start from the top and what Fortinet's main security philosophy is at this point. That really is illustrated by the security fabric, or what we call the security fabric. And so it starts with FortiGate at the edge of the network as kind of the brains of the operation, if you will. So gathering in data on your network from all these different sources. So with that, you'll notice in the topology here, and actually let me zoom in a little bit. So I actually have a few different FortiGates here. I'm actually 5 in total. So there's this FortiGate that I'm actually logged into. Then I have a couple of branch locations, all from this main topology off of this main FortiGate. I can get information on them as well. And then I have a couple of other FortiGates down the line that are in the same building as this main one that I can check up on those as well. Then behind each of those, you'll notice that there's different colored circles. So that's all of the different devices behind each of those FortiGates. And with the right equipment, this does involve a few things beyond just FortiGate, but just kind of to illustrate what we're trying to accomplish with information security in general here. I can hover over each of these endpoints and get information on each of those endpoints based on how much bandwidth they're pushing, who's actively logged in, if there's any vulnerabilities present, things of that nature, MAC address, IP address, so on and so on. And so it gives me a quick way to look into, kind of get a quick status update on not only those main FortiGates, as well as our access points and switches and all of that from this page, but also the endpoints as well. And so if you're looking to do a quick overview on your entire network and see maybe some points of interest you should check into, this is the place to go for that. Also, if I right click on here and drill down to details by source, I'm able to filter down into that individual endpoint. And as this populates here, get some logging information about that specific device as well. So since the bubbles on that main topology page were different sizes based on the amount of traffic they push through, I clicked on one of the bigger ones that pushed through the most traffic, so I can see specifically what they were up to. And of course, that information is sorted by various different categories here. So it started on applications. It also will go by destinations, if there are any threats detected, websites, so on and so on. The last thing of note here on this topology page, as I stall for a second as this comes back up. Help me out here, FortiGate, thank you. Is this critical risk section on the right-hand side. And so I can see, a list of endpoints that I might want to take a closer look into from a security perspective. And so anything listed here has either been classified as compromised via zero-day threat, and actually get that from our logging appliance, just like some of the endpoint data we get from our endpoint security client called FortiClient, or if the device was found to have any critical vulnerabilities. And so you'll notice there's also an option here to either quarantine the host or ban the IP. And so based on if that device is behind one of our switches or access points, or just in general behind a FortiGate firewall in the network, we can limit access that that device has to different things based on the threat or the severity of the threat itself. So with that, it gives you kind of direct control to shut things off immediately if need be. There's some automated versions of this as well. But really it comes down to beyond the FortiGate firewall itself, having that endpoint client, FortiClient, as well as that logging server, FortiAnalyzer, and all three of those working together to build out this complete picture of your network and provide kind of that security blanket over your network versus individual point products that just do their thing and don't really communicate with anything else. So to kind of set the tone before we go into some FortiGate specifics, that's really the main goal here from a Fortinet perspective moving forward, is to have those different products that communicate well together to protect your network together versus individual pieces here and there. So with that said, I'll go ahead and dig into some specifics of the FortiGate firewall itself. And with that, we'll start with firewall policies. Get a lot of compliments from customers on how these firewall policies are organized and how easy they are to deal with and configure and maintain. So first off, the only thing that will be on a FortiGate firewall when you first set it up, plug it in, is this implicit deny at the bottom. And so by default, everything is going to be blocked. You're really just creating exceptions to that with all of these policies that you set to only allow certain types of traffic through. In creating those policies, so there's kind of two main sections here. So at the top, you're defining the criteria for what type of traffic you're going to look at. And then at the bottom, you would set all of your security profiles. And so adding in those UTM features to the type of traffic defined on the top half. So in adding that information, we'd start by adding in our interfaces. So incoming interface, outgoing interface, those would be defined by, literally any interface, physical or logical present on the FortiGate itself. And so whether it's, Ethernet, MPLS, VPN, any zones or VLANs you create, those will all be available here to add in to this portion of the policy. Next, we're going to add in our source information. So address objects, whether it's a specific subnet, IP address, IP group, either way, adding in that information here for that source, as well as users. And so users can be local users, LDAP-based, radius-based users, the ability to bring all of those in from local and remote authentication sources and tie those into these policies as well. And also with those in here, have single sign-on options available for the FortiGate to get username, IP address associations on a network, get those updates and have those handy so that when devices try to go out to the internet, it already knows which users logged in based on getting those username IP association updates. Then on the destination side, we'd have more address objects available there, and also what we call internet service objects. And so I'll use Adobe Cloud here as an example. And so basically any IP address or IP group or IP range associated with a certain topic. In this case, it's Adobe Cloud, and we're looking at well over 100,000 IP addresses and almost 700 IP ranges. And so if you're using one of these services, instead of trying to keep up with all of that on your own, we would have that dynamically built into here and automatically updated by our FortiGuard Labs team, which also keeps all of our security signatures and threat signature updates and all of that up to date for us as well. Then we'd have the option to set a schedule for the policy for when we want it active during the course of a week. Adding in a service, which is the protocols that you want to be looked at for this particular policy. We have a bunch of default options here. If there's not something here that you need, you can always create your own custom protocol, define all of that here, everything that's involved, and then use that custom protocol in the policy as well. Then it's defining, by action, whether you accept or deny the traffic. Then we get to inspection mode. And so by the inspection mode, we're basically defining how I want to approach securing the traffic, whether it's flow-based, where we're looking to secure traffic streams, or proxy-based, where we're looking to secure each individual packet in the course of that source and destination communication. And so because of that, proxy-based is more resource intensive because you are scanning each individual packet. However, in our processor chips, we have what are called SPUs, or security processing units, that are going to split out that heavy security processing from the regular network traffic. Since those have their own separate streams of going through and being processed by the firewall, everything ends up being sped up as a result of that, since it's essentially different portions of the process are doing the same type of transaction over and over and over again. And because of that, and especially because we make the chips ourselves, we get a lot of throughput for very low cost. Okay, so next piece here is NAT. And so source NAT, destination NAT, port forwarding, we can do all of that here. We're good to go. On the security profile side, so getting into those unified threat management filters and applying those to the traffic definition that we set at the top here. The top 5 here are probably used the most often when it comes to securing, traffic in general, really. Antivirus and IPS are going to be focused more on looking for threats and then taking those out so they don't make their way into the network. Antivirus is going to focus on malware signatures as well as sandboxing. And so that sandboxing process being looking for suspicious traffic, throwing it up into our isolated environment, and so that being the sandbox itself, and opening up the traffic, testing it every which way to see if it is indeed malicious before making a determination on whether that traffic is safe or bad. IPS, that's going to focus more on vulnerabilities in specific applications and the signatures that are developed to look for behaviors related to that vulnerability, and they're trying to compromise that vulnerability and take advantage of it. And then having different filters set to where you can make sure you include all of the IPS signatures related to a certain topic. You can also flip those signatures between monitoring and actively blocking, and so you do have that built-in IDS IPS functionality within that single profile. The middle 3 here are focused on different types of internet access control. So web filtering focusing on URLs, DNS filtering focusing on domains, and then application control focusing on those layer 7 signatures or application signatures. All 3 of these are going to have categories that you can assign a rating to based on how much of it or how you want that type of interaction to be treated within your network. Once you assign a rating to each of these categories, we can also go down, if need be, and set static filtering. We're essentially creating exceptions to what we had set in the categories above. And so you can get as specific as possible or as need be for each of those categories and the exceptions there. And same thing would apply with that domain filtering and layer 7 filtering as well. It's setting the categories and creating exceptions where need be to fine-tune things to get it where you need it. The underlying service, and probably the most important piece that kind of complements all 5 of those at this point, is SSL inspection. With that, we would have a couple different options when looking to examine secure web traffic. It's more important now than ever since a large majority of web traffic out there is secure. So we either look to examine the certificates of the website or web server being accessed to make sure that that's valid, and also checking the web rating to make sure that there's nothing wrong with the actual URL itself. Then we'd have a more thorough examination with deep packet inspection. We're actually terminating that certificate handshake on FortiGate, looking at what is then unencrypted traffic to get a full sense of what's being accessed, if it is indeed good or bad traffic, and then repackaging it up with our own certificate and then passing it along to the end user. Because we're kind of inserting ourselves into the middle of that traffic route, the web server still sees the client is valid because it has a valid connection with the FortiGate at that point, is that certificate client. And then on the other end, the client or the end user sees the traffic is valid because it's going off the certificate that the FortiGate itself has. So both ends still see the traffic stream as a good, valid stream of traffic, but we're still able to get the information we need and to make sure that all of that is secure. Last but not least, for policies is logging. And so we're able to determine if we are able to set, if we want to log everything related to that policy, if we just want to log these security events. So if there's any, events of note or violations for these, UTM filters, or if we don't need to log it all. Once we do that, we go ahead and finish the policy. We get back to this main page. From here, you'll notice the blue pencil box in the upper right-hand corner of each of these sections. We're able to make edits to each of those boxes for each of those policies from this main page. And so once you've created that policy initially, you're able to make pretty much any edit you need to make, all from this page and be good to go. Also, for the policies themselves, we are able to drag and drop these to get them in the right order. So even you might notice as you initially create the policies, they may be completely out of order to how you want them to be ranked. It does go top down as far as how the FortiGate looks at those policies to determine which ones should be used for certain traffic. And so you can move those around pretty easily to get them in the right order. Okay, so next big talking point I want to hit here is VPN. And so we do support IPsec and SSL VPN. One key factor here is that we do not charge any type of license for VPN use in the traditional sense here. So for creating IPsec tunnels, for creating SSL VPN tunnels, or the clientless portal for people to log into and get access to certain servers internally, there's no license associated with that. The limiting numbers you'd see in our data sheets are more for the physical capacity of the box itself. And so if you need to use it, if you don't need to use it, and you don't have any need for it up front, but maybe later on you decide you do, you don't have to worry about needing any client-based licensing or site-to-site licensing or anything like that. It's all standard, but you'd be good to go. For IPsec, there is a wizard in here that you can use to set up a variety of different types of VPN tunnels. And we'll use the remote access client in here as an example. So I can go through and you essentially just fill out the information as prompted. It'll ask you, in this case, it's asking me for what interface should be listening for VPN connections, how I want that VPN authentication to go, whether it's pre-shared key or certificate. On the next page, it'll ask me about IP addressing and routing and all of that good stuff. But essentially, once you fill out all this information in the wizard, it'll go ahead and set up the actual full-on VPN tunnel for you, along with any policies necessary to allow access. The other piece I'll mention here is that if you need to connect, because a lot of this is for connecting to either other Fortinet devices, Cisco's also in here as a default option. But if you need to connect to something else, let's say site to site to a different vendor, something like that. We can create a custom tunnel. They'll give you access to that more traditional VPN type configuration where you can fill out your networking, authentication, phase 1, phase 2, so on and so on, to get that to match that third-party vendor's firewall as well, or VPN concentrator, whatever it may be. Get those to match up so you can still have that tunnel to a third-party device. Okay, so next piece here, won't dig into it too much, but just to make a note that the FortiGate firewall, when you're setting this up in a site, if you have our switches and APs or use our switches and APs for a new deployment, something like that, you can manage those access points and switches from the FortiGate interface as well. If you have multiple sites, let's say 4 to 5, 7, 8, 9 sites, and you want to have a firewall, switches, and access points at each of those sites, that also then rolls up into a central management platform called FortiManager that can manage all of those firewalls, switches, access points, all from the same management GUI. So there's definitely some options there as you add more and more sites to make that management a little easier moving forward. Okay, next piece here with logging options. And so it really breaks down into 3 different types of logs. So the first is looking at the different types of traffic streams. And so this is essentially going to look at anything that comes through the FortiGate itself. No matter where it's starting, where it's going, anything that goes through the FortiGate at any point, a log will be generated for that here. And then it's just a matter of what you want to search for if you're looking for something specific. So there's a lot of different criteria and filters you can use. Also, as far as how this table looks, there's a lot of different columns you can select too, as far as what you want to see in the actual table that pops up in the FortiGate interface itself. Second type of log here would be events. So in this case, I just clicked on VPN events, but there's several different types of event logs that you'd be able to search through here. And kind of similar setup to the main traffic logs. It's just this is specifically looking at VPN related events. And in this case, anything for a tunnel being initially established or status, statistic logs for those various different VPN tunnels. Also on the end user side, whenever a end user successfully connects to the VPN tunnel for a FortiGate, that gets logged here, but also when there's unsuccessful attempts. And so if you have somebody that keeps trying over and over again unsuccessfully, all of that data will pop up here as well. Last but not least is the UTM logs. And so, based on the UTM service you're sifting through, the logs can pop up a little differently, but same type of format as the other type of logs. You would have your main column options here with all of that data populated out in the GUI itself. And from there, you can use filters to specifically search for a certain type of log you're looking for and go from there. And so as far as where to store these logs, we do have, by default, FortiGate will store logs in its local flash storage until you tell it to do something differently. We also have FortiGate models, even for the smaller models, options that have built-in SSD drives. So you could store those logs locally to the SSD drive. We also have cloud options for storing that information, as well as that central logging platform I had mentioned earlier, FortiAnalyzer, to kind of essentially aggregate logs from all of those different Fortinet appliances. Okay, so next big differentiator. So the first one, as far as differentiators go, is VPN. Because it's a standard service, it's really easy to set it up and use. I'm finding that a lot of our competitors still charge for VPN clients and sometimes even site-to-site VPN tunnels. So that usually ends up becoming a big deal. The other one at this point is SD-WAN. And so the FortiGate has SD-WAN built in to its interface. Each FortiGate is set up to make its own SD-WAN decisions. And so it's all about bringing in all of those different WAN connections, whether it be just straight Ethernet, whether it be 3G, 4G backup, or just wireless mobile backup, MPLS, VPN, literally anything WAN facing we can throw into this SD-WAN interface, and also tie into different groups. And so in this case, I have a overlay and an underlay. The overlay has all of my VPN connections that I'm going to be balancing and essentially load balancing between. Then my underlay has all of my backline Ethernet connections. And from that right off the bat, once I get those tied into this interface, I can see at the top kind of a breakdown between how much each port is taking of that overall throughput coming in and out of the firewall, based on bandwidth, volume, and session count. From there, I can set up SLAs to specifically test the performance of certain interfaces going to certain target servers. And so in this case, I'm using my 2 Ethernet ports and a VPN connection going out to salesforce.com and office.com. In this case, we're using ping. We can also use web requests, domain requests, and to set the interval for how often that should happen towards the bottom there, but also to be able to set an SLA target for what that minimum setting needs to be. And so, setting the thresholds for latency, jitter, and packet loss based on kind of what's required for that type of connection. Then once we get that set up, we can go back to this main page and we can see that SLA target on this dynamic chart at the top based on, and compare that to all of my different ports and see very quickly how my different connections are performing based on where I need them to perform. And of course, I can do that for latency, jitter, and packet loss separately here. Once I have those set up, then we get into SD-WAN rules here. And so that's where I'm taking those SLAs I've created, those interfaces, and kind of combining them together into an actual policy where it's determined which port actually gets that type of traffic. So I start by defining my source information, whether it's address or user base, kind of similar to the firewall policies at this point. Then do destination, address objects available there, those internet service objects, as well as application signatures. To define, specifically as possible what type of destination we're trying to track the connection to. And then we determine, using one of 4 algorithms, what port will end up getting that traffic. And so if I just decide to manually assign it, it's going to go top down in terms of hierarchy to determine what port ends up getting that traffic. Internet A, in this case, is at the top. So anytime Internet A is active, it'll go ahead and get that traffic. If that goes down, it'll dynamically flip to either Internet B if it's up, or if that's down as well, also then flip to the VPN connection. And as the ports above it come back up, it'll dynamically flip back to one of those other ports. So, manual is really looking at the list of interfaces it has, and then flipping back and forth based on the highest ranked or highest prioritized port that's available. Best quality, looking at those same interfaces again. In this case, I'm defining or bringing in a specific SLA and using its performance metrics and selecting a quality criteria, and then using that specific quality criteria to determine which interface gets that traffic at this point. And so latency is here by default. I can also flip it to jitter, packet loss, specifically upstream or downstream bandwidth, or just bandwidth in general. And then based on that, it'll dynamically look at which port is performing best based on that quality criteria and that SLA, and dynamically flip which port gets the traffic based on the best performance at that point. Lowest cost is going to look at that SLA in general, and then whichever one, based on the which ports meet that SLA, whichever one has the lowest cost associated to it while meeting that SLA will end up getting that traffic. Then with maximized bandwidth, you again starting with each port that meets the SLA, but in this case, kind of load balancing between all of them in a round robin type format, using all of the ports to send out traffic based on the source destination above, to utilize as much good traffic as possible, or to get that best bandwidth number possible. All right, so as far as the FortiGate itself, it's kind of a few different things I wanted to walk through to show you today. One last thing I want to point out is, so, I mentioned a little earlier, in the middle of the presentation, that FortiGuard Labs was the one that maintains our dynamic information, security updates, that's internet service object information, all of that good stuff. They also have a public website where you can go and research. And so that is fortiguard.com. So you go there, you can literally search for anything, just based on a variety of different types of searches. And if you're looking for a new threat that's been out there and the CVE ID, you can actually look it up by that ID here, and then it will pull up in all the information they have based on that specific threat. Or you could just stick with normal, and just as an example, I'll search something like Facebook. And it'll bring up everything related to Facebook. You'll notice on the left-hand side here, it gives you some options to refine the search even further based on what was found. So in this case, almost 300 total results. Looking at filter by category in the lower left-hand corner here, a lot of application signatures, a couple of IPS signatures, a ton of malware signatures, and then some internet service objects. And so if there's not only if you're just looking for new threats, but if there's an application within your network that you want to make sure you have all the protections turned on for, this is an easy way to make sure that you're using what's available. Also on the lower right-hand side, if you scroll down, it'll give you an idea of when the last time an update was sent for certain malware signature updates. So in this case, for antivirus, the last time one was sent was 51 minutes ago. Mobile malware detection about an hour ago. IPS a little longer, within a day. Same thing for industrial security. So all those SCADA signatures, ICS signatures. And so if you're looking for, to make sure that you're updated with the latest, you can set FortiGate to dynamically update as those new database updates are available, but this is a place to go to manually check yourself to see when the last time an update was pushed. Okay, so I think at this point, that's what I wanted to show for this morning. So at this point, I will go ahead and hand it back.
Okay, Nathan, thank you very much. There's a lot of good information. I know we do have some questions that are in the Q&A. We have some folks that are managing the Q&A, so I'm going to bring Mayhar on, and she can start identifying the questions that came up during the presentation. Go ahead, Mayhar.
All right. Hello, everyone. So the first question I have is, why is the FortiGate firewall the next generation? What separates you from the competition?
So the main thing at this point, well, a couple different things. So we're in a good place with Gartner. We're in the leaders quadrant for not only network firewalls at this point, but also SD-WAN. And so having both of those on the same appliance is a big deal. Also, they've closed their doors at this point, but when NSS Labs was running their tests, I think we were it's either 6 or 7 years in a row where we were recommended for UTM security, so that those next generation security pieces on the firewall with antivirus, IPS, and the rest of them. And they also started doing their own SD-WAN tests. We're recommended for SD-WAN. Both times they ran those tests as well. And actually the first time they did that, we're the only firewall vendor or vendor in general to have recommended SD-WAN and recommended UTM security on the same appliance. And so we're being tested and kind of meeting the expectation of very, very high standard with Gartner and formerly NSS Labs for maintaining kind of both pieces there, but also on the same appliance. And also from a cost perspective, because we make our own processor chips and because the way it handles parallel processing and boosts performance a lot, will end up being a very cost-effective option on that competitive landscape as well.
All right. And then the next question we have is, with all of the scattering to working from home, what is the threat posed by connecting company-owned equipment to the home network?
So that's where that endpoint security comes into play. And making sure that, because you are essentially extending your corporate network to the home and doing it in a lot of different ways. And so you want to make sure that those endpoints are locked down as well. I've seen customers kind of approach it a few different ways. It usually ends up with some form of endpoint security client on each of those endpoints. It's just a matter of how much they want to track those endpoints, how much they want to lock them down. Some companies prefer to have split tunneling for VPN, to where if they need corporate resources and it routes them into the network, you can do security checks along the way to make sure everything's still good there, to allow them to access what they need. But for literally anything else, it just goes out local internet, never touches the corporate network. So a few different ways to go about it, but usually starts and ends with endpoint security in some way, shape, or form.
All right. And then the last question I have for you guys is, how does Fortinet mitigate the threats posed by home networks to secure the teleworker community?
Okay, so that kind of ties into that same conversation. You really have to lock down those endpoints. And it's a little easier if they're company-owned devices. And so like the laptop I'm using is a Fortinet-owned device, even though I'm sitting at home and have been for quite a while now. So when they want to update the security standards on it, it's not, asking permission. It's more, hey, this is our stuff and we're updating the security on it to make sure that all of our stuff stays secure. And so it's kind of the same way for locking down those teleworker devices. It's, you're using this for work. It's going to have access to our network. And so we're going to make sure that, not only your device is secure, but it meets certain minimum security standards so that when you access our network, we know that your endpoint is secured up front. You can go from there. Have also seen some customers in certain situations for C-level execs sometimes to send them out a small firewall as well, just to make sure the entire network around them in their home office has that UTM security in front of it. But that one kind of depends on the situation.
All right, and one last question. What about mobile devices? Can Fortinet secure mobiles too?
We do have a security client for mobile devices. It usually is around web filtering, since that's the main use for a mobile device in terms of possibly getting into that situation is around going to a website and having something get put onto your device from that point. So there's web filtering. It is also, it's not an MDM itself, but it can integrate with third-party MDMs and kind of provide web filtering along with whatever that mobile device management has.
Okay, and then another question. What is SD-WAN?
SD-WAN. Yeah, so software-defined wide area networking. And so it's being able to take those multiple different ways of reaching out to the internet, or just any form of WAN, and managing those different connections to get the best possible connection at all times. And so that's why all the different policies I had gone through testing SLAs, that all goes towards achieving that goal of dynamically keeping up with the best way to connect to the internet and get to where they're trying to go, at all times. And even when it, switches on the fly, if a internet connection goes down or if the performance is degraded severely, things of that nature, to be able to keep up with those changes and keep that connection as good as possible.
All right, that's it for the questions. So back to you, Jim.
Okay, thank you, Mayhar, for managing the Q&A today. Appreciate that. Thank you, Nathan and Brian. A lot of good information. That's all we have for today. Hope that everyone can join us for the next conversation with Sarah Keith of Maryland Manufacturer Extension Partnership, also known as MD-MEP. Mark your calendars. She'll be joining us to discuss the latest changes to the Maryland Defense Cybersecurity Assistance Program, or DCAP, by providing updates regarding funding and assistance for defense contractors to comply with DFARS and NIST 800-171 standards for cybersecurity. We have a number of topics throughout the year, so please be sure to sign up for our notifications so you can receive the latest information. As always, if you're interested in extending the conversation on the Next Generation Firewall or have any additional questions you would like us to address, we'd love to talk to you. So please feel free to contact me using the information on the screen above. Also, I have added Brian's information in the top corner as well. We'll be sure to follow up with everyone regarding your $10 Starbucks gift card. In the meantime, we ask that you take a moment to please fill out a brief survey and feel free to follow us on social media if you're interested in getting updated industry information. Check us out at eTrepid on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Pinterest, and YouTube. Thanks again for joining us. We look forward and hopefully talking to you soon and seeing you at the next Coffee and Conversations. Have a great week, everyone.